We are at our One Mighty Mill Hyde Park Mill. It is the second of our 4 milling locations. The first being up in Lynn, Mass. March 2020, we were starting to make so many bagels and mill so much flour that we realized we needed to grow. So just as all the craziness of the pandemic was happening up, we christened this new milling location. Unlike our first mill, this is a 3-mill system. It's beautiful. It's definitely our most workmanlike of our 3 different big milling locations. We have one in Blauvelt, New York, which is just right over the Tappan Zee. We have one in Sebastopol, California, which is in lovely Sonoma County. This is like the meat and potatoes, hard hat version of One Mighty Mill, 3-mill systems. It's also really special, not only because it's our first 3-mill system, but really because there's 2 brothers, Leo and Mauricio, 2 folks that are just incredible human beings, incredible millers, and they're also people that I've worked with for about 20 years now, so they're like family. And they run this operation, they run it incredibly well, and I'm gonna be really excited to show you how they do what they do and what goes into milling stone mill flour for all of our baked goods. So let's go give it a look. Mauricio Martínez, nos hemos conocido por casi 20 años, digo yo, porque estabas trabajando en el otro lugar.
Ajá.
Y nosotros ya estuvimos los 2 restaurantes en el mismo sitio.
Sí, en el mismo sitio.
Y luego después un poco, no contigo, pero con tu hermano, sí, por fin ya comenzamos a trabajar juntos. Y ya llevamos, como digo, casi 20 años juntos. Bueno, so we got a new truckload coming in. Very exciting. But when a new truckload of wheat comes in, it's going to arrive in a super sack, and we are going to check the wheat, make sure quality looks great, everything about it looks right. We'll do a couple of lab tests, make sure that it checks out. We're going to pop it right over here, and we are going to hook it up to our 3-mill system. We're going to use this pneumatic system so that it's going to suck the wheat up into the mill, and then we will proceed to mill it. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was actually doing a lot of milling. Mauricio is doing things that I could never imagine with milling technology. So I want to make sure that I touch base with him and make sure that I'm properly explaining the way he does it, because he's become a master miller. And I think I'm probably like a green belt in terms of milling at this point, whereas Mauricio is a black belt miller. One thing I want to dig into right now is, this is kind of our control panel right here. We have a couple more inputs, but there's 3 or 4 inputs that we control which decide how we're going to be milling. This is really important. This tells us the internal temperature of the stones themselves. We mill cooler than most. And what that means then is that all those nutrients and those flavor compounds, which are heat sensitive, we make sure to protect them by milling, in the 80s and 90s, and well short of what I think a lot of the industry does. So when folks are saying, wow, I'm getting all these incredible flavor notes, your flour is so unique, that's in part to North American Stone Mills, which builds the best mills on the planet, and to the fact that folks like Mauricio are making sure that we're milling cooler rather than letting those stones get nice and hot. So we already showed you kind of like our master control panel system. There's still 2 different inputs that we control over here.
Esto es, lo que hace es regular las piedras para que ellas muelan el trigo.
So basically this controls the space between our top stone, which is the runner stone, and that's the one that rotates around at the 50 to 60 RPMs, and then this is the bottom bed stone. So right here, Mauricio, when we start milling, when Mauricio is going to start up in a couple of minutes, the stones are slightly apart. And when we say slightly apart, a 32nd of an inch, a 64th, really finite amount of space. As he starts milling, he's going to tighten up these stones. And for different types of wheats, we do use hard red spring wheats. That's going to be, the hard means that brand is going to be a little bit harder. Mauricio is going to have to tighten up the stones a little bit more. And when we're using a soft winter wheat, he doesn't have to tighten them quite as much. The bran is a little bit softer, which means they'll yield easier, and the stones don't have to be quite as tight. So this right here controls just how tight the stones are.
Aquí, para darle vuelta a eso tenemos que tener un poco de cuidado, porque si nos pasamos del número que marca allá, ahorita estamos en 12.2, si nos pasamos, entonces las piedras se aprietan mucho y puede agarrar fuego.
As he's tightening the stones, he's looking at the amperage of how it's milling. We want to have a kind of a controlled amperage, meaning when it's milling properly, it's in a sweet spot where the stones aren't having to work too hard. If the stones start demanding a lot of amperage, we know that something is off. Also, too, he's going to be looking at the internal temp. So if you tighten the stones too much, you start heating up everything and producing more friction than you want. So there is a sweet spot, and a lot of that is interactive, looking at how amperage is going and also how temperature is going. The other thing he can control is right here. This is a gravity feed, but it does have a little auger inside, which ensures exactly what speed we want to be milling. So right here, he's going to control just how fast the auger is moving. I like to think of this as kind of a slowly moving stream of wheat. The slower it moves, the more time the wheat gets to spend on the stones, the finer that we can mill, and probably also to the colder we mill. We always want to make sure that when we're milling, there's wheat falling down into the stones. We don't ever want there just to be stone on stone. So there's two different ways that they're making sure they know what throughput looks like. One is simply with a timer, and they know what speeds are and how fast we're milling. The other thing, though, too, is that this ladder allows them to go and check, make sure that their timing is matching up with the throughput. Andrew, obviously, I think he's a great craftsman, and he's also a really good designer. So he's got these beautiful stainless upside down pyramids, if you will. Those hold the wheat. I think we can get approximately about 450 pounds up there. One thing that's cool, I can't wait to show you a tour of our mill in New York and our mill out in California. But in those milling facilities, we actually use a forklift to put 2,000 pounds on top of each mill. Like I said, this is a little bit more old school. This was our first iteration of a 3-mill system. We have to kind of manually make sure that wheat is getting up there and checking on it. One of the cooler named pieces of equipment, the Dust Cobra. We are going to hook up these tubes that you can see over here. We're going to put them into the super sack, and like a virtuous vacuum cleaner, this pneumatic system is going to push the wheat over into the mill. We've got these tubes that are pulling wheat up into the mill, and obviously gravity feed down below. And then there's the output, which are these beautiful stainless pipes that are going to take flour that's jumping off the two stones, pull it up through a pneumatic system and over towards where we're going to catch it. Those stainless pipes that you saw coming off the mills, we will just drop that flour right into one of these big receptacles, mix around to make sure it's nice and even, and either leave it in one of these big receptacles to bake with at our partner bakeries, or more likely in this facility here, we will actually bag in 50-pound bags so that it'll be easier to work with for the folks mixing at the bakeries. As an overview, there's basically two types of One Mighty Mill flour. Obviously different kinds of applications, but in terms of how we mill, it's either whole grain, which is awesome, or it's slightly filtered, which means that we're pulling out about 7 or 8% of the wheat berry to ensure that those baked goods that need it can get a little bit more lift than the density of the whole grain flour. What this front receptacle here is generally going to be about 90% of the wheat berry. So what we'll try to catch is all the endosperm, but a good amount of bran and germ milled really fine. And that's why Mauricio is working hard to make sure that our stones are tight, so we're getting the highest extraction of the whole wheat berry in our first bin, the flour. The middling bin, the flakes are a little bit larger. The middlings is formed from both the bran and some of the germ. And then the final piece has no filter attached to it, and that's where our bran lands in the final piece. ¿Nos puede enseñar?
Claro. Claro que sí le enseñamos.
So when we are milling whole grain, we don't need to use this, but when we do sift, this is our sifter right here. Mauricio just reminded, when we do sift for some of those baked goods, these first two, the sifter, as you can see, is a little bit finer. So it's making sure that we're getting as much of the flour as we can. And there's also a brush inside, which is pushing. It's almost if you've ever pureed berries and try to pass them through a strainer. That kind of pushes the flour that's been milled through here so we can get all that fine flour to drop in these two first bins. This right here, in milling terms, is known as the middlings, in part because it's the middle bin. And you can see that the screen is not quite as fine. And then the third bin is going to be strictly for bran, and that will have no screen whatsoever. So anything that can't fit into this middle or the first two screens will drop right in there, and that'll be the bran. On the whole, extraction rates are approximately 90%, meaning at the very least we're getting 90% of that wheat berry, although when we mill whole grain, it's 100% of the wheat berry. We are now in one of our most important areas of the mill because this is really what guides how our milling works. Mauricio, ¿me puede explicar qué tenemos aquí?
Aquí tenemos una máquina del laboratorio y con esta hacemos los exámenes del trigo y de la harina.
I think you can see right here that about 15 minutes ago, Mauricio just got a test, and the two primary things that he's going to be testing for, moisture, making sure that we're on point for moisture, also checking out where the protein of the wheat itself is at. Want to make sure that we have specs for everything that we do, and that ensures that our baked goods are going to come out properly. It all starts right here, though, with Mauricio testing 3-4 times each shift, make sure that everything is on point. Mm-hmm. Mauricio's been doing all of all that hard work for milling. Final step, explicarnos así. Después de moler tanto y tener toda la harina allá, ¿qué se hace?
Venimos y la sacamos de allá y la embolsamos en un promedio de 50 libras.
And this is awesome because this is our original system. We actually have other locations where we just leave it in big 2,000-pound containers. And we want to certainly work that way because as we jump in right now, Mauricio will show you, these guys are experts at bagging flour, but it's a lot of hard work because they're milling a lot of flour. Good on these guys for doing it the old school way, but we're I think, going to graduate to bigger super sacks for our flour sometime soon. Mauricio, ¿cuántas paletas va a tener?
Es que son bastantes, vienen 6.
¿Y cuántas veces traen trigo por la semana? ¿2 veces?
2 veces.
All right. There's not a whole lot of space inside for holding extra wheat and for extra flour. So what we do is a couple times a week we will receive a shipment. And when I say we, I really mean Mauricio and Leo, about 12,000 pounds of wheat each time, 2 to 3 times a week. Receive it, get it in here, start milling, and then the resulting flour will make sure to get out to our partner bakery so everything is nice and fresh. Right now, the wheat is just arriving. That sound you hear right now, that is a sound of a Toyota forklift slowly, ever slowly revving up. We just received 6 of these super sacks. If you ask me, this is a feat of modern technology that you can get 2,000 pounds in one of these super sacks and hold it all together. Mauricio's done 2 things. The first thing is he's checked to make sure that the wheat is nice and clean. And so what we mean when we say clean, of course it's been cleaned a whole lot, but it also means that it's been filtered to get out any of the rotational crops or any of the other parts of wheat. One thing you'll see Legumes are used as rotational crops at a lot of the farms where we work, which is a thing of beauty. Instead of using fertilizers, we're using the actual rotation of crops and legumes like this to fix nitrogen into the ground. But the reality is this is as clean and beautiful as organic wheat goes. And what's also really cool is this has all been done naturally, the old-fashioned way. I learned this from the stone mill builder, Andrew Hyde, who is a genius and who taught us not only a lot about milling, but a lot about wheat. Andrew likes to take some of the wheat berry, one or two, and he'll just chew on it. And he can get a lot in terms of texture and understanding how soft it is, and also just general flavor. So Andrew is kind of like the mill whisperer. And I also think he's like the wheat whisperer. And so I think we've learned to do it. It's one of those things, the first time you put a wheat berry in your mouth, it's like, wow, that's a wheat berry. The more you do it, I think the more you start to understand the nuances of one varietal to another and one class of wheat to another. As a reminder, this is coming from Peter Martin's farm in Penn Yan, New York. This is a varietal called Brennan, which is a heritage varietal. And I think Peter, after testing a lot of different types of wheat, a lot of different varietals, has found that this grows best in his on his land in a way. It also has really beautiful characteristics, great flavor. It gets great rise, and even though the protein is in the high 9s, it kind of punches above its weight, and it's really great in our sliced bread. So chances are, if you like our sliced bread, it's Peter Martin's wheat, which is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So thank you, Peter. The final stop on our tour is right here where we have all of our finished goods, all the flour that Mauricio has milled today, and he's packed it up. This is now going to head off to our partner bakery, and this concludes your visit and our little tour of our Hyde Park Mill in Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you, bye.
Thank you,
we'll
everybody.
See you soon. Like,
subscribe,
rate, review, smash the buy button.